Every week it seems like there are intriguing new waiver wire pickups that come out of nowhere. Except that half the time, I've already talked about them weeks before on Beat the Breakout. So let's get ahead of the game again and talk about the players that are going to be valuable before it happens. Now, although I'm going to start with running backs first because that's always the most important position to stash players, my two favorite picks are going to be my last two. But let's start in Cleveland, where there's another running back injury. So Jerome Ford was looking pretty good, but a high ankle sprain is suspected, and he's going to be out a couple of games. So what'd you do? You went out and picked up Kareem Hunt, or somebody in your league did, and that makes sense. He has been scoring touchdowns, he's been getting involved, and he's the name that you know. But what you might not know is that Pierre Strong, who was acquired from the Patriots in the offseason, is going to be just as involved and maybe more involved. In the Week 7 game against Indianapolis, Pierre Strong actually outsnapped Kareem Hunt, and he only saw 2 fewer carries. We really haven't got a good sense of what Strong can do as a running back because rookie season in New England was barely used. He had some injuries, and of course it's the Patriots backfield. You know how that goes. But so far, he's been effective. We can't say he hasn't. In his brief career, 31 carries for 202 yards. That means he's averaging a pretty healthy 6.1 yard per attempt. Strong is a guy who has good hands, not a big back. He's a very fast back. In fact, you look at his measurables, almost off the charts here. He ran a 4.3740. He's got a 95th percentile speed score. There's athleticism here for sure. Wasn't highly drafted because he came out of South Dakota State, but this is a guy who just needs a shot and maybe can produce. Well, this could be his shot. Kareem Hunt, of course, being the veteran, knowing the system, obviously he'll be the number one running back for the time being, but it wouldn't surprise me if this really comes out to be more like a 50-50 split for now. Hunt hasn't been as good as a runner, and also Hunt's kind of been dealing with a thigh injury lately. We're not too far off from possibly seeing Strong get the majority of the touches here, but even if it is a split, I feel like Strong could be just as effective, if not more. My only concern here is that Hunt probably gets the goal line touches, so your touchdown upside is capped, but I think Strong is a very good waiver wire stash here, whether you have Hunt or not. Now another young running back, this time it's a rookie, and a guy is completely under the radar. Chris Rodriguez of Washington. You may not realize that last week he actually was the leading rusher for Washington. Now granted, that was only 31 yards, and it came on 7 carries, but the fact is that he was just as involved as Brian Robinson in terms of handling the ball, and Antonio Gibson is basically just vanished from this offense. Gibson saw a total of 4 touches, and that marks the 3rd straight game where he's touched the ball exactly 4 times. Robinson is still the guy here, but Rodriguez is basically the RB2 now. He's seeing his workload ramp up. I don't think Rodriguez takes over Robinson's job. Robinson has been fine, but don't be surprised if Rodriguez now gets enough touches to be fantasy viable. If you don't know his background, this is an SEC running back because he came from Kentucky, so he was a 6th rounder. He had a huge 2021 season, 1,378 yards, and scored 13 touchdowns. Then only played 8 games a year ago and was down to 904 yards, so his draft stock did fall a bit. But that 2021 team went 10-3. Again, in the SEC, he was teamed with Will Levis. Very good offense. I mean, Rodriguez went up against the best in college. He can do it again in the NFL. This is not the ideal situation, of course. Washington's offense is inconsistent. The O-line, not the best. But look, a running back who gets touches, a guy who we know has some juice, fresh legs, that's what you're looking for if you're stashing ahead on the running back waiver wire. And with Gibson basically just a non-factor here, don't be surprised if Rodriguez continues to ramp up. And now I want to talk about a running back who, for the position, is, I guess, kind of an aging veteran at the age of 26. Devin Singletary in Houston. You might have forgot he's even there. But we're also possibly seeing the start of a transition there in that backfield. So before their bye, Devin Singletary saw a season high with 12 carries for 58 yards. Again, nothing overly impressive, which is why nobody's jumping all over him on the waiver wire. To be honest, this whole Texans running game has been very inefficient. That's why Dameon Pierce, the guy who expected big things from, being dropped in some leagues, benched in a lot of others, and Singletary just hasn't got enough touches to do much with him. That explains Singletary's 3.9 yards per attempt, whereas his first 4 years, back when he was with Buffalo, he averaged 4.6 yards per carry. So while he's just under 4 a pop, I look at Dameon Pierce, not even averaging 3 yards per carry so far in the season. Singletary has been more effective, and again, we saw in week 6, he started to get more touches, so it could be where a 1A, 1B becomes reversed. Maybe Singletary is the 1A here. And I will say, even though Houston just said that offensive line has been bad, they have missed a lot of players due to injury. They should eventually start to get a little healthier. The bye will help. Teams are going to have to start game planning for that passing offense too, with CJ Stroud looking so good. Singletary won't be the guy with the highest upside, but I will say he is a sneaky start in week 8. Because going against the Carolina Panthers run defense, this is a team that's given up the most touchdowns to running backs and clearly just not a great defense in general. Not only that, but over the next few weeks, Singletary is still going to be interesting if he's getting enough touches because get some weaker run defense as teams like Cincinnati, Arizona, and a few weeks from now, Denver's on the slate. Speaking of Carolina, I'm actually going to look at their offense now and a player that might be ready to finally emerge. Two kind of strange developments lately with that wide receiver core. So first of all, Carolina coming out and saying they need a true wide receiver 1 to help Bryce Young out, whereas before they had said he doesn't need that because he's good enough that he can get by with what he has. It's also kind of curious that a team like Carolina with a rookie quarterback and a very bad record would go out and trade for a veteran receiver. And the other thing is that Adam Thielen, 33-year-old Adam Thielen, who hasn't had a 1,000-yard season since 2018, he's a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. All that said, I still think Thielen is a guy it's time to sell high on, and I think Jonathan Mingo is a guy to buy low on. And by buy low, I mean basically pluck off the waivers because he's available in most leagues at this point. What we saw early this year was Mingo was getting targeted plenty, and he was getting a lot of air yards. He was by far the air yard leader on that team. But the targets just weren't reaching him, and that's mainly because Bryce Young, young quarterback, just wasn't ready. Now, I'm not saying just because they had a bye week they figured it out, but there's a couple reasons why I'm now interested in Mingo. First of all, Bryce Young looking a little bit better the last couple of games, but also I do think they will figure some things out, and that is because Frank Reich is handing over play calling duties. He's not going to be the OC anymore. This team knows, especially with the record as it is, they just have to try to get more aggressive. They need to do what's best for him, not try to worry about not losing games, which is basically how they're playing. And then I'll just say I don't expect Carolina to pull the trigger on a trade for any big name wide receiver because that makes absolutely no sense for them to get a guy like Hopkins or even Judy. Why would they do this? But they might be trading away a guy like Terrace Marshall, who has been rumored to be on the block, and he's starting now to get faded from this offense. I actually think we see more involvement from Mingo again. Their best bet is to develop what they already have. They drafted this guy higher than most expected, and so they need to utilize him and get that connection between Young and Mingo. That's the only path that this team really can take to grow this offense. And Mingo is a strong candidate for positive regression. Can tell you, very smart guy, Scott Barrett on Fantasy Points. And this information is available free right now on that website, so I'm free to share it. 9.9 expected fantasy points per game for Mingo. He's only averaging 5.7 fantasy points. That means he is one of the top positive regression candidates out there. On the other hand, Adam Thielen, he is 8th highest in terms of being a negative regression candidate. I mean, we feel like there's no way Thielen can keep this up. He probably won't. Thielen will still be startable, sure, in PPR leagues especially, but I've got to think that Mingo does get more targets, does get the air yards and the deeper shots, so I like Mingo as a stash to see if he really emerges. And then I want to talk about a young receiver who has all the talent in the world, but just really hasn't developed yet for various reasons. I am still in on Treylon Burks. Now, this seems like really weird timing to be in on a guy in Tennessee when their starting quarterback is hurt. We have no idea what the rookie Will Levis is going to look like, and this team is actively selling before the trade deadline. But that's all part of the reason why I'm now interested in Burks. Sure, we have no idea what this quarterback situation will look like going forward. I really don't feel like Levis can make this team necessarily worse in the passing game. If anything, they might open it up a little bit. Tannehill has just been locking on to Hopkins in the passing game and really nobody else. And then while we never really expect big name players to be traded in the NFL because it doesn't happen as much as we'd like it to happen or think it will happen, what if DeAndre Hopkins does get traded? All of a sudden Treylon Burks is the number one target far and away on this offense. Probably not too many teams, jumping to trade for DeAndre Hopkins after they weren't jumping to sign him this offseason. Derrick Henry is a real possibility. Look, if they trade their bell cow, Derrick Henry, they will have no choice but to pass the ball more, and maybe that's what they want, to see what they have with this young wide receiver quarterback combo. Burks was a first-round pick a year ago. He's a physical player. He's got that size-speed combination. He's been hurt this season, so haven't heard from him because just in week 3 got banged up and now is finally ready to return. There are red flags all over the place here, a lot of risk factors, of course, but that's why a guy who's so talented like Burks, who should be a fantasy stud, hasn't done it yet. This is the time to stash him and see what happens. If you missed any of our other Week 8 content to help you set those winning lineups and win once again, well, we got your playlist for you right here.